at a document that has some discussion questions that folks can look at and sort of think about. What we'll do first is introduce each other and then have Kevin, who is sort of the mastermind behind our eSports program, after school program for social and emotional learning, describe it very briefly, about 5 minutes, and then we'll discuss. So in that time, you'll have a chance to look at those discussion questions, and those are not a mandate, they're just jumping off points. So hopefully we can speak on whatever interests everyone here. So, okay. If we want to go around and do introductions, perhaps who we are, and maybe if we have an institutional affiliation, and then what we're most interested in about after school programs or social emotional skills or esports, which is a new generation of video gaming that's a spectator sport. So those are sort of the three subtopics. I can go first. I'm Jordan Reed. I'm at DePaul, and I'm a PhD student in psychology. I've long been interested in persistence, which is trying to get students to stick with post-secondary school. And I know after-school programs are a big way to help. I got connected with the Online Technologies Lab, which includes Dr. Keys and Dr. Steltenpohl, and has grown to include Dr. Powless, Kevin, and many other folks who are on this call. Dr. Dettori, and we've kind of really expanded, and this Zoom is quite full of us now. So, and thinking about, so my contribution to this is thinking about social emotional learning skills and career preparedness, and how CPS students can get those early on in a way that's enjoyable to them, and as part of a fun peer activity. And I can go ahead and pass it around. Crystal?
Sure. Hi, I'm Dr. Crystal Steltenpohl. I'm an assistant professor of psychology at the University of Southern Indiana in Evansville, Indiana in the US. I use the pronouns she, hers. As Jordan mentioned, he, Chris, and I really had started to focus on the fighting game community initially through an online survey, and that kind of grew as we shared results. Kevin joined on board, and then eventually we were reached out to by Betty Shanahan, who couldn't make it today, to talk about developing esports more at DePaul. And so more of us ended up reaching out to other folks, and then now here we are with this mass here. And my excitement here is I focus a lot on education as somebody at a teaching focused institution, but also just somebody who thinks there are awesome, effective ways that we can teach students things. And I love the idea of integrating video games into that process. So I'm excited to talk about that today. And I guess I could pass it on to Chris maybe, and then we can kind of keep following that pattern.
Hi, I'm Chris Keys, he, him, his from DePaul, and I've been interested in schools in a number of ways over the course of my career, from organizational change in schools, organizational change through curriculum development in the 70s and 80s, and in the 90s, support, and the aughts, support for students with disabilities in schools, especially students of color. And since I've come under the hypnosis of Crystal, I've been interested in community psych approach to understanding gaming and gaming communities. This has been an intriguing opportunity to enter into a kind of a new organizational culture. Let's see, Lucia, yeah.
I'm Lucia Dettori. I'm an associate dean and faculty in the College of Computing and Digital Media at DePaul in Chicago. My involvement with this comes from a long involvement I have with Chicago Public Schools, working on expanding and broadening participation in computer science. What attracted me to this is that I like to meet students where they are, and today they're playing video games. And a lot of the SEL skills and general what we refer to 21st century skills are foundational to computing. And so this is just what we should be doing. Who do we have back on our group? Kevin, you'll introduce yourself once you start speaking, probably. Matthew?
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Dr. Matt Powless. I'm also an assistant professor at University of Southern Indiana with Dr. Steltenpohl. So my background is actually in counseling psychology with a focus area in sport and performance psychology. So doing counseling with student athletes. And while I was at USI, Dr. Steltenpohl told me about her work with esports, and we got to talking about some of my interest areas, and we saw a lot of overlap. And so through that, she let me come to one of the initial OTL meetings, and a little over a year later, I'm still tagging along with them. So I've been really excited to be a part of this. And so I'll let Kevin take it away.
Sure. So I will just go ahead and share some slides to help me make this as efficient as possible. So let's see here. I think this will be it. So hopefully everyone can see this slideshow now with my name on it. Thumbs up if that's working. This is what I do with my students. You'll learn that I still have some tendencies that are catered more to them. So anyway, so I'm Kevin Ryan. Just to make the group even more interdisciplinary, I am focused almost exclusively in education as opposed to psychology or sport. And I hold 2 MEDs to that end, but I connected with Crystal in the OTL lab and everyone else who's now part of this huge interdisciplinary team looking at developing this program, which I'm going to get into pretty quickly here. And word of caution, I'm going to go through this at something between breakneck and ludicrous speed, just so we can have as much time as possible for discussion. So as I tell my high school students, I encourage painstaking note-taking. If there's anything you see here that you want to dive deeper into, I could probably do 5 to 10 minutes on every single bullet point in here, but I'm sure everyone else here would rather have the full discussion with everyone and all the great minds that we have present. So here we go. So this whole thing started with kind of the relationship to DePaul's strategic plan in mind. And when we started working on this program, we were really thinking about how to touch on all these aspects of DePaul's mission, teaching, scholarship, creative work, and public service, and how to connect that more to a greater presence in Chicago's public school system. And as Lucia alluded to earlier, like this program really grew out of the fact that students are engaging in video games in a way that we see them engage in other things very rarely. And so it really grew out of just paying attention to what students are interested in. And then the more work we did on this from the lens of psychology, education, computer science, no matter how we looked at it, we found all these connecting points that really tied it together in this really incredible way. And we're going to try to illuminate a little bit about how that came together and what it looks like now, a week out from our prospective launch of the pilot. So from the beginning, DePaul's role in this was really hands-on throughout the whole process, helping facilitate the development of the curriculum. It's going to continue through training the people working in the program, facilitating the inception of the program, the pilot of the program, as well as helping us provide and secure resources, and then ultimately tracking the outcomes and the usable data. So this can become something that we can study, that can be portable to other sites. So really, this is a holistic approach in terms of the way the program was constructed. But it all kind of revolved around 5 outcomes, which you can see here. And I can go into more detail on these later, but suffice to say, it really ranges a wide variety of outcomes. Everything from providing this actual like sports like coaching to providing social emotional intervention, to increasing enrollment at DePaul and other institutions in Chicago, and then ultimately connecting back into the research that really got us interested in looking at a program like this in the first place. The other big priority for this program was that we wouldn't just be another after-school program that facilitated sport. We wanted to really also stress these proven outcomes that lead to positive post-secondary outcomes for students. So there's this, you'll see imbricated in this whole thing, a social emotional learning push in. And that's presented to the students through things like these lessons that are developed through our curriculum, guest speakers and presenters, and as well as this firm foundation in ed psych and community psych. And then the last piece of the puzzle here is that as much as we all work together to put a program together that would serve all these different outcomes, we also wanted to make sure students were at the center of it. So throughout this program, you'll see two that woven into it are opportunities for us to listen to the students, because we really feel that that's what made this program a good idea in the first place. So students have an active role in the program. They're going to be generating content and leading projects as part of the program. And also, ultimately, we hope to have students serving on an advisory board that informs the direction the program takes in the future. So I'm going to zoom through these slides, but if anyone here is sort of a youth development nerd like me and wants to look at the logic model, as well as dive into our collaborative for academic and social emotional learning wheel here with all the outcomes we're going to be working on, we're happy to do that too, but I'm going to kind of elide it for now so we can save some more time on the back end to have discussion and tell you a little bit more about what D-Sports actually is and what it's going to look like when it starts up in about a week and a half. So at its core, esports does all of these things that might be familiar to you. So helping students work and compete as a team, focusing on growth and improvement, learning from failure, learning how to use new tools, technologies, and tactics while in the program, as well as building on students' passions, right? And this is nothing new. These are the same exact outcomes and competencies that we see being built in all sorts of after-school programs, from drama to basketball to 4-H club, right? So the only difference is that we're providing this through video games, which we know to be high engagement, and which we know to be sort of intrinsic learning tools. As we talked about in our webinar a couple weeks back, we had a really great guest speaker, Greg Topo, who talks about how video games are some of the best teaching tools available to students, which is especially relevant now in the time of remote learning, where we're just trying to find ways to keep students engaged. But D-Sports kind of takes on a different character than conventional learning or conventional after-school programming. It is built on these cornerstones of 21st century learning. So the skills that are actually used in the program on a day-to-day basis foster communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. And then the program itself is constructed to foster those practices by design. So first and foremost, it's designed to give students a place to game. So a community in school, and now during remote learning out of school and remotely, where we can come together and work as a community and play together. So that's gonna be 5 hours a week that students are doing that. And it's also creating this sort of world of esport that students can engage in a way that has not really been accessible in sort of the context of Chicago public schools before. So we have on-site program educators who are from within the schools where the pilots are, who are leading the curriculum day to day. We're providing sports-based training, coaching that's led by DePaul students and faculty, and then opportunities for real competition, both in school and between schools, so students can test their skills and monitor their progress. But built into this too are these college and career readiness metrics. So we're supporting academic thinking and problem solving, which is a topic we'll get into a lot more, I think, during the discussion part of this. Also, we're providing opportunities for students to network with near peers in college who are part of the esports community, but as well as industry professionals, connecting them to people who can tell them more about sort of the burgeoning career opportunities available to people who are interested in the gaming industry from whatever aspect, whether that be game design or marketing or esports itself. And then lastly, the program is all about really catering to students' passions. So it's also able to vary from site to site. It's for students of all levels, whether they're brand new to gaming, casual gamers, or competitive gamers. And it's also catered to students with all different interests related to gaming, whether that be digital media, computer science, or STEM. So ultimately, the whole program is designed around this idea that the best sort of learning comes from playing, which I think is I love this saying, because it's also kind of the way that we came up with the program, right? We got all these people from different disciplines together and thinking about the skills that we brought to the table and the insights that we were all seeing kind of aligned about what we were seeing in gaming communities and learning through gaming. And we just started sort of playing around with this idea. And it was through that, that freedom to play with it that we're able to construct this program that really we feel is responding to what students are asking for and providing outcomes, or going to provide outcomes that are going to prepare students for a 21st century workplace and a 21st century academy experience. So hopefully that was breakneck speed enough for you guys, and we can move on to the fun part where you guys get to talk back to us a bit. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I'm going to go ahead and add this link again the third time. I know that when folks join a Zoom, they don't get to see the history of the chat before they've joined, so I'll add that there. So sort of as Kevin described, we've got a project ready to launch, and the path we took to get to launch was one full of adaptation. And I think probably that's a common experience with anyone dealing or working on after school programs or anything involved with social emotional learning programs for youth. So I think if we discuss anything, it'll probably be in the vein of adaptation. So on that link, you'll see a menu of questions or a menu of topics to possibly discuss. My hope is that if somebody sees one as especially interesting to them, we can have attendees sort of select what they would want to talk about. And if we want to also, we can just go through the list. But I'll go ahead and turn it over to anyone if you want to unmute yourself and suggest any of these topics or any questions you might have in general about the program as well.
Does this feel like your class as well? When you're tossing a question in and
I can see
a bit of silence.
I can see human faces right now. So this is already just an incredible upgrade over the muted and visually muted class of 35 people. So, and I'm very comfortable with uncomfortable silence. So I'm in my happy place right now.
I have a question. So I work at an after-school program, but it was mainly younger kids. And one of the things the parents were really worried about is making sure their kids are moving and getting physical activity in an after-school program. So is there any sort of way to incorporate that into this after-school program?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, yeah, if anybody has to add to that, you can go ahead, but I'll probably say in this COVID time, I think coming up with after school activities that people can do just to interact with each other outside of their normal curricular work is kind of tricky. And I can definitely see when this program transitions to in-person, as it was sort of originally envisioned, we might come up with ways to incorporate the physical side. And I know there's already some mindfulness parts of the curriculum which include physical. I know Matt is adding things about a physical relaxation activity. So there's some, but yeah, when it comes to trying to get students to connect virtually, I think that's an important consideration. I agree. And it's kind of a challenge. So yeah.
And I would correct me if I'm misremembering, but I think also right now, especially since we're not meeting in a physical space, a lot of it's based off of PC gaming, which is a little bit harder to get activity on. But once you're doing in-person stuff, I mean, like there's a lot of really cool games on the Switch and stuff like that that I think would be easy to, integrate. Like Ring Fit Adventure, although you do need some equipment for that, but even stuff like the fitness boxing games, Just Dance and stuff, you can do both competitive and kind of casual stuff with that.
Yeah, We've also, in most of the lessons we've planned, there's the first 15 minutes are sort of dedicated to getting warmed up, which includes like actual stretching and stuff. And we're going to have, I think, some esports players come in and talk about the importance of maintaining some physical fitness and stretching routines. Because it sounds crazy, but if you're playing video games for six hours a day, like some of these pros do, actually the pros, it's probably closer to 12 to 15 hours a day. That stuff's actually really important. And it's also important just for general mental health and any athletic advisor. And I think we're going to have a few, Matt can probably speak to this more than me, come talk about how that's a huge part of staying competitive in any kind of competition, whether that's in football, baseball, dance, or video games. And so maintaining a physical fitness regimen is part of that. So while we won't be explicitly doing like, stair runs or anything like that as part of our curriculum as of right now, it's definitely something that will be a topic of conversation, I think.
Yeah. So one thing that's really interesting part of this curriculum that Kevin was alluding to is that we're going to have guest speakers from different areas. And so two of the colleagues that I have are sports psychologists for various college and professional teams that have also consulted with esports athletes. And so they were going to speak to some of the students about, as Kevin was just saying, the importance of maintaining their physical health and their mental health and strategies for regulating their emotions and being mindful of what's going on in their body so that they can make the adjustments they need to make whenever they are feeling stressed or, off their center, so to speak. So yeah, it's certainly a challenge, but we're trying to come up with some creative ways to get to it.
Yeah.
Dr. Perkins, I think you.
Yes, so I'm this is thrilling for me to hear all of your research. So thank you very much for doing this. And I think I like the integration of the mind, body, and the technology, right? And especially in the area of nutrition, because that's another thing, doing gaming or being at the computer that long. I saw an illustration. It was a comic illustration, but it had a gamer. You just see from the back and this pile of snacks, and they were all, of course, bad snacks. And so it'd be interesting to see just an awareness that we learned from this year with the pandemic, that if you're not healthy, nothing else matters. And it's kind of a sad conclusion for our humanity, our civilization. But if you don't have an ability to be healthy, science, everything is irrelevant. So I like the idea, and I like the idea of also incorporating in there this understanding that of self-reflection, self-governance, self-regulation, and my all-time favorite, self-awareness. And I think the games have such a potential to expand people's minds and to learn about diversity and inclusion, to learn about government and politics and all the systems that are systemic and breaking down in our world. This is the perfect opportunity to use that, so that, you have that balance. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Sorry, am I cutting someone off? I can't tell if you're...
So I was going to signal you, Kevin. I thought you'd have a good answer for that.
Yeah, so I think what's really alluring about this and trying to continue it through, this period of remote learning for students is, I think a lot of us have experienced this in the last several months where we're kind of able to figure out how to meet those other needs. Like you start doing workouts at home and maybe you buy a kettlebell or you buy, a workout like program that you can access online that you can do. And as far as eating, like we've figured out ways to, shop from home and buy healthier food. Like I think HelloFresh is like getting quintupled the business they used to get because people are trying to eat healthy. But some of the hardest things to do while we're doing remote learning is one, establish new communities. What was so amazing about this is when we told students about it in my school, where the only after school programs that get any traction are basketball and to a lesser extent volleyball and robotics. But as soon as we mentioned esports and gaming, I had 30 students telling me they were interested. And the fact that they are willing to log on and do anything with me after school is already kind of like a win, right? And so if we can work in social emotional learning and then this other aspect of learning through critical thinking and things like that, I think that's addressing a need that is harder to get at I think, than anything else during this time. And, you know, video games are so incredible for this because there's not many places or not many things you can do like on your couch, holding like a console in your hand or with your laptop, where you can interact with other people, you can learn through failure, you can experience incremental improvement, and you can be engaged in a community in this way just by turning it on and logging in. So I think it's a pretty crazy opportunity that I don't think we anticipated in any way happening like this, but
if I can add in just to make a point, that same things that you're saying translate to college. So it's actually a skill that they're getting and a community that they can find. Like at DePaul, the casual gamers community is primarily made of students that would not, and they're not, in any other group at DePaul. And so it's a way for them to find a community that they would not necessarily find. So it's a very important things that they will bring over.
And I think I remember stats, Lucia, maybe you remember that they were tracking people who were coming into the gaming center, and it was actually mostly commuters, right? Like people who were gaming between classes, people who wouldn't stay on campus otherwise. So these are people that were able to help build a sense of community among that are often the ones that fall through the cracks.
We're being cut off. Our mic are being turned off.
I'm so sorry. I hate to end a great conversation. I just want to make sure that our next presenters also have enough time. So what I would love is if you could share your contact information in the chat so people can follow up. Another thing too is if you want to share, I know some of us have like personal Zoom or WebEx rooms. So if you want to continue the conversation live, that's also an option. So I'm so sorry, but we just want to get our next presentation in, which is titled Student Affect, More Than a Moderator or Mediator. And I will turn it over to our next set of presenters. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Sonji Jones-Manson, and presenting with me today is Dr. Ray Legler. I am going to share my screen because I have a quick presentation about the research, and then starting from there. Can you guys see that okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so I am a community psychology PhD graduate from National Louis University, and I'll let Ray introduce himself.
I am an assistant professor in the community psych program at National Louis.
Great. And so I'm going to talk about student affect, which was the topic of my dissertation study. And for the discussion, I want us to think about the role of student affect in our current education situation, the way it is now with the remote and hybrid learning and the online learning, as classrooms bleed into the home. And so what led me to conduct this study is that for a long time, I've been wanting to rethink the perception and understanding of the role of students in the educational ecology. So I have 17 years of experience working in communities, primarily on the west side of Chicago, the past 4 years in the south side of Chicago, from roles that range from community outreach worker, boots on the ground, to executive director of programs. Often, most of my work has been with new and pilot programs, all with youth, young adults up to the age of 30. And so I've been working with young people for a very long time. And one thing I noticed is, you know, this need to increase their voice and to pay more attention to their affect. So in education, of course, we know the three outcomes that we mostly focus on are cognitive, behavioral, and affective. And most research on affect is limited to understanding affect as it relates to cognition and behavior. So how does it moderate or how does it mediate cognition and behavior? And so while, you know, my argument is that while cognition and behavior are good metrics to measure the ability of a system or the adults in the system to produce a certain type of student, the skewed attention to cognition and behavior objectives positions students as human and social capital. And I'm not personally aware of how you can both humanize a student and objectify them at the same time. And that was my concern about the skewed perspective, focusing on cognition and behavior. And so this is a question that drove and shaped the study. You know, what might the possibilities be in education if more research was designed to focus on student affect as an outcome, if we were to learn more about understanding how students perceive the various aspects of their experience in education. And I like this particular quote because it reminds us that if we want to evolve the educational system as we know it now, that we must be willing to dive more deeply into the subjective realities of the students and how, as it relates to their experience within the system and what they desire from the system. And so my research project, I focused on, it was a small sample size, phenomenological, reflective, qualitative study. I had 12 participants between the ages of 18 and 21. Half of them were still in high school. Here are other demographics about them as well. Since you guys are from Chicago, I also mentioned that half of them were also from highly selective enrollment public schools as well. And I think that, and I'll explain why I think that's important to mention. And so just very quickly, the results there were of the general school experience was overall positive. So you see, most of the kids said that they liked high school. There are a few that expressed challenges with adapting to it. They had a general overall positive affect towards school. They liked their teachers. They had good feelings and thoughts about their teachers. So I just wanted to color the sample size, the sample, so you guys can get an understanding of who was engaging in the research. And so there were 2 questions, and I'll just very briefly go over the findings for the questions. And so this is the first research question here on the screen that you can see. And what's important that I want to kind of point out today is that the most influential type of teacher actions were observable actions that demonstrated to students that the teachers wanted to enter into relational knowing with them. And so again, half of these students were in high school. They were all, the ones in high school were seniors. The other half had graduated high school in the last 3 years. And then for this second research question where I asked about, where I explored which learning outcome was most important, again, affect of the 3 learning outcomes that I described in the beginning, effective outcomes were the most important to students. And so here's a summary of the findings. The participants in this study believe that high school should be a space where they experience personal growth in their affect towards themselves and others, and they were supported in developing life goals. They believe that high school experience should be guided by teachers who are positive, accessible, and cared about their craft. And again, they believe that teachers should be willing to enter into relational knowing with them while facilitating a learning process that expands their thinking and is grounded in the real world. And they wanted all of this to happen in a quality facility. Now, during the research, the students did not mention cognition and behavior. It did not show up as significant. And so here are the interpretations of my findings, which was relational knowing emerged as the most influential teacher-student action, which I mentioned. And so this is just a definition that Donald provides of relational knowing, which is basically placing a high value on knowing about students' interests, backgrounds, aptitudes, fears, and personal lives, for those of us who might not be familiar with relational knowing. And these are some ways that research has described the impact of relational knowing and how relational knowing can be important to engage with students in the teaching learning process and in school cultures as well, and how it's necessary as well to develop transformative teaching practices in urban settings and to close cultural gaps as well as persistent low achievements. And so there are 2 implications of this study that I want to share. One was, of course, the implication for teacher preparation, and it begged the question, you know, are teacher training programs adequately equipping teachers to enter into relational knowing with students or incorporate relevant real-world content and experiences into the teaching learning process? And this is where I think principles and practices in community psychology can be very important and beneficial. in this particular aspect of preparing teachers. Being able to do so can support students in the personal growth and development of their life goals that they develop. And historically, teacher education programs have rarely, if ever, been informed by urban communities that they're serving. And I also challenge programs to go beyond providing teachers with just a historical and theoretical knowledge-based approach to addressing the cultural gap and preparing teachers to enter into relational knowing with students to create transformative practices in their classroom spaces. The second implication had to do with the value of amplifying student voice, particularly in two areas. One was in the area of school reform. And again, it begged the question, are student voices informing curriculum design or the accepted standards and norms of within the student-teacher relationship? Learning more about student affect provides this opportunity to enhance student voice and how it's incorporated into the full ecology of the educational system. And then the insider perspectives that students provide can bring about real change and create meaningful, liberating, and engaging school experiences for the students and the teachers as well. And then with regards to amplifying student voice in the area of the purpose of education, which has long been debated and discussed, what is the purpose of preparing students? Well, the findings from this study, the participants feel that the purpose of education is to help them understand who they are, figure out their identity, and prepare them to lead a life of purpose. And so I like to just end the presentation with this note that I wrote about from Pinterest, which is, it's time that we think about moving into more research that focuses on affect the same way that in the 80s we had an onslaught of research that focused on cognition and behavior. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can enter into a discussion. So I just wanted to share the research just to color the conversation. But as we think about what's going on now, like I've been, there are headlines about students' attention waning. I don't know if you guys on your Facebook feeds and your social media feeds have seen conversations about students' engagement in the virtual learning environment. I just heard Kevin talk about teaching to muted visual screens and having no sound in his classrooms. And in my particular network, I have, because I've been in the field for so long, I have the benefit of having access to administrators and teachers who are sharing their experiences as parents, as administrators and teachers, as well as parents. And I hear, there are lots of discussions that I'm reading about, what are some things that we can do? Some schools are being very strict with their regulations. Some are just letting the kids have at it. What I have not heard about is anyone pulling the students to the table to find out how they're feeling about about their educational experience right now. When I conducted this study, I interviewed all these kids in March and April of this year, right when schools closed at the beginning. So it's very interesting to have their input, and the fact that even at the very beginning of the pandemic, affect had already, for these seniors who were closing out their high school experience and these college students who were beginning theirs, they understood how important affect was to them. And while a lot of the conversation around, how do we improve this new learning environment that we have, I hear a lot of talk about cognition. What are we going to do about testing? How are we going to make sure the kids are prepared to move to the next grade? What about the way the kids behave in the classroom space now? But what about how they feel about the experience? And what does that mean for us as psychologists, as researchers, as educators? What are some things that we can do in our spaces to bring student affect to the forefront of research, to the forefront of education reform? Because I believe, whether we know it or believe it or not, education is being reformed in a massive way right now before our eyes. And so we can just open up, you can unmute yourselves and we can just have this conversation. And Ray, you can hop in anytime, of course.
So is it Dr. Jones-Manson now?
Manson, yes.
Manson, yes. Doctor is the part I was emphasizing.
Yes,
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So yeah, I like the relational knowing. I kind of see it as being seen, right? So being acknowledged, being seen, and a call for students wanting to be known better, and for their teachers and educators to be able to integrate that into their learning. And that, I guess that's a question mark on the end of that too.
I guess I just have kind of a question, I guess, with something that I've been working on this semester. I've been involved in a youth action research project with 2 high schools kind of in the Cincinnati area. And so we're logging onto calls every week and asking them about problems that they see in their community and how do they want to fix them. And it's part of a science class that they're already in. And I guess the affect that I get from them, a lot of it is just apathy, and they're tired. And so when I sit there and I'm like, okay, like I'm trying to engage them, and I think I'm just not doing a very good job of it. So like tips on that as well. But sometimes I get the sense that they're like, tell us what you need to tell us, and then we want to go because we're tired and we don't want to be on the computer anymore. So I guess I just wanted to put that out there, and maybe other people have had similar experiences or any tips with how to even engage in the conversation of affect when I kind of get the sense that the best thing I could do for them would just to get them off the computer.
I think that's a part of relational knowing. I think sometimes because of what we're held responsible to as adults, we tend to push our agendas because we have timelines, we have deadlines, but especially in this environment, if students are seeming apathetic and tired and wanting to get off, that's me. I just think relational knowing is meeting them where they are. Today, we're not going to get to our lesson. Today, we're not going to get to whatever, my goal is for the day because you guys are apathetic and tired, and let's talk about that. I want to know more about you in your space, in yours, how you're feeling emotionally, what your perspective is of this. Can we talk about a little bit about what's draining you in this process? That gives students voice. It lets them know that, hey, you care enough about me to pause your agenda for a moment and pay attention to what my needs are. Because often, particularly in high school space, they're not going to necessarily speak up and articulate it in a way, but we have to be able to read those verbal and those nonverbal cues as well, and to prod and ask questions in a sense. So that's the part of relational knowing. It's, it's like any other relationship. If your partner was seeming apathetic or drained, you'll say, hey, let's talk about what's going on. I sense that you're, feeling some kind of way right now.
I feel there is a need, given the new way of teaching for so many teachers and students, to support the teachers themselves in this process. I mean, majority of the teachers have not been trained to teach high school students through Zoom. So it's, let alone what they themselves are experiences in their lives. So yeah. It's,
I would just,
in the current context, it's
Yeah.
a very complex thing to do and analyze as a result of that.
I was going to go ahead and just throw in, I mean, I teach college students. Sonja's research is obviously on high school students, but it seems like, the common thread of most folks who have figured out how to connect with students is that connection piece, is that getting to know them, listening, paying attention, showing you care. And, doing that in person is a challenge enough. Doing it online is a whole nother level of challenge, I think. I know I personally have experienced that in my teaching of graduate students. And Sonja's point in her presentation about teacher preparation, where in the teacher preparation process are we making a serious effort to equip teachers with the skills that they need to connect to their students? It's often sometimes, assumed, well, you're going into teaching, you love kids, you care about kids, of course you're going to connect. I think we've all had teachers at various levels where that wasn't true. And I think, some people come to it naturally, and that's great. And others maybe could use some help and support. But ultimately, I think, you know, for me anyway, any success I've ever had as an instructor really came out of trying to build that rapport with the class, trying to build a relationship with the class, letting them know that I'm on their side and I have their back and I'm supporting them. And I think once we can connect in that way, students are much more open to learning and listening and not being so concerned about what is my grade, is my teacher gonna, you know, hit my grade, or those kind of things.
And so I'm going to speak this very broadly in a very radical way about even understanding how we set up classrooms, period. I mean, to enter into relational knowing, first of all, we have to, in my opinion, schools and classrooms are set up in a way where students already know they're walking into an environment where the boundaries are set, the norms are set, and expectations are set, and they have to fit into them. And they have to figure out how to mold themselves into what the school or what the teachers expect. If we really want to take a, use community psychology practices and tools, if we really want to enter into relational knowing, that means building those spaces with the students in partnership, building the norms and the standards and expectations with them. That's as simple as in the first week of class, here's a skeleton of a syllabus that we're going to create together. What do you expect to get out of this class? What do you expect from me as your teacher? What do you expect from your classmates in this learning environment? What are some topics that you want to cover? A simple conversation as simple as building a syllabus with your classroom, because that classroom is now the community. They're going to travel together as a cohort pod for 10 months. So you built that community. You're telling them right off the bat, you don't have to come in here and figure out what I need from you. We're going to work together through this process and figure out what we need from each other to learn.
And I think also adding on to some of the points that other people are saying, I had one day I teach my students research methods and stats, and so I gave them a scenario. They were supposed to do either an independent or a dependent, one way ANOVA, supposed to figure out which one they were going to run and do it. So I split them into their groups to have them, do it. I wait a few minutes and then I start going through the different groups and seeing where people are, and they were just not getting it. I mean, it wasn't even like they didn't even know where to start. It was like pulling teeth. And like I kind of realized like in that moment, it's like, excuse me, Matt, for the analogy here, but like if you've ever like started to try to run for like a 5K and like you keep running and your body is tired and like you're still running, you're not getting any better at running. Like you're just making yourself more tired. You're just frustrating yourself more. So like we had like 30, 40 minutes left in the class. I just brought everybody back to the main room and I was like, let's talk. What's going on in your life, right? Let's just talk about how everybody's feeling right now. And then after they shared, like I ended up sharing like how I was feeling. I was like, I haven't been outside this house really since March. Like it's been really isolating for me as well. And I miss seeing you guys and all this stuff. And in that, that happened a few weeks ago and it's been just a completely different class since then. And they email me regularly, not just to check in with me, which I think is really sweet, right? But also to thank me for being there because they're like, none of my other teachers are doing this. They're just trying to get us to pretend that everything is okay right now and it's not. Right, we've got an election coming up. We've got all the BLM stuff that's happening. Right, we're pretty close to Louisville, so we're seeing all that stuff with Breonna Taylor. Like there's just so much that's already going on top of the pandemic. And so I think there was a question in there about like, does this break up like does it pause the learning? I don't think it actually pauses the learning. I think it resets the learning sometimes, especially when students are just not emotionally getting there.
Thank you, Crystal, for sharing that. And that's a perfect example to answer that question. And I was going to ask you, did you feel like it paused your learning or that you had to go and catch up after that?
No, we're still on track. And I feel like if I would have kept trying to hammer through, I think we would be behind.
And that was one of the findings from the research. Out of, one of the kids said something, and I'm just going to paraphrase her. She said, well, she expects to learn reading, math, and arithmetic when she comes to school. That's a baseline expectation. That's why she's there. What she needs is that relational learning component. And that's what, and the kids that participated in the study, some of them were getting it from a teacher here or a teacher there. Maybe their sophomore year they had a teacher, maybe their freshman year they had a teacher, or maybe not until their senior year. But it wasn't consistent. And how much more impactful could education be if we were more intentional about pulling forward student affect in the way we design curriculums. If we took the pressure off the teachers to have to go through this lesson plan and this curriculum and meet these metrics at this time and this date, and just focus on what skills do the students really need to know. Like, do we have to read this story to learn how to write critically? Do we have to go through these 3 novels this year? Like, are there other ways we can build this into our English curriculum, into our math curriculum, that can give the teachers and educators room to enter into relational knowing, to bring real world experiences in, all the things that the students want, so that when they leave high school, when they go out into the world, they feel like they're the prepared adults that as educators we really want them to be anyway. We want them to be contributors to society, but the way that we're doing it right now, are we really truly preparing them, or are we just cramming them through our agenda?
And can I ask, from like all the presentations in this block, it seemed one of the big takeaways for me is to be able to use the technology, to be able to use the relational knowing, you know, the esports, the relational knowing, these takeaways that you guys have all presented today, to help advance students into a way different way of being, because we're having to redo this whole society anyway. I mean, all the systemic stuff has got to go. And this is something they can hold on to as they move forward. I'm just throwing that out for your thoughts.
Looks like we might be out of thoughts.
I'm reading through the group chat.
Especially thinking in the gaming spaces where you can create these environments where there's relational, you know, or a pathway to relational knowing, a pathway to start helping to build those bridges, right? Those connections.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so I'm, when I'm in my classroom, whether that's in person or remotely, I see a lot. I'm always thinking about what the barriers to this are, right? Because I've talked about some similar ideas in my class, and I've tried to make them happen in my class, and they don't land, either because students don't know how to engage or they don't feel empowered to engage. And there's sort of this, like, the best way I can describe it is sort of like shared learned helplessness, right? So people will do this on like an individual level in their class, but there's a sense that I'm the only teacher that's doing this, or an admin who tries to do it's like, well, but I have all these other things I have to do that the school's going to be assessed on, or we're going to close or get demoted. And the kids, like I've done the class norm setting at the beginning of my class, like we're going to write this syllabus together, and kids don't want to engage because they don't believe it's actually going to lead to anything, because it's not consistent enough, right? And so there's this lack of immediate return for input, right, from teachers and from students and from admin. And I think what's so great about video games is it's designed for immediate feedback. That's why it's so alluring to us. That's why, like, some people characterize it as addicting, because why wouldn't you love something that gives you immediate feedback? Like, I succeeded or I failed, it worked or it didn't, what can I learn from this? And that there's a disconnect in education as it exists right now, where we don't get immediate feedback, or we don't feel empowered to like give and receive immediate feedback. Like Krista was talking about, like that's a rare moment in a lot of classrooms. You can say, all right, guys, like, how are you feeling? Like, what's working, what's not working? You get real organic feedback. And I think the challenge is finding a way to get everyone on board with that and take the risk of like chasing down like how we make that happen while you're answering to all these other metrics, and with standardized testing and graduation rates and, you know, fidelity to IEPs and 504s. And I don't have a great answer to that. But I think the more it becomes a shared goal, the more it becomes a possible one.
I actually think community psychology practices can really serve and be an answer to that. And you think about for those practitioners who go into a community that have a similar dynamic, you're trying to bring different stakeholders to the table. In the school, the stakeholders are the students and the teachers and the administration. You're trying to bring different stakeholders to the table. You still have, you know, your funders that you have to answer to. You have to hit certain metrics as an organization that's providing service, but at the same time, you want to get your community members that you're serving involved into the table. You want to have their voices amplified and heard. And community psychologists are doing this all over the place, you know, with different groups. And so there are methods are out there. I think if we begin to think about what a community psychologist does as far as the ones who are out there bringing people together in communities around an issue, around a topic, and amplifying the voice of the voiceless or the marginalized. And unfortunately, in schools, the students are the marginalized. Their voices are marginalized. So using those same tactics and practices and applying them in the education setting could be a way. But of course, you have to work kind of laterally and more vertically at the same time. Like, it all has to happen at the same time. It can't be, it's not a ladder. It has, that synergy has to take place.
Mm-hmm.
And just really quick, I think to add to that too is I think that spaces like online communities, like gaming communities, can offer a space that classrooms for a lot of students are triggers for anxiety. Because they do have these metrics that they have to meet, right? That we're imposing on them, and then we're also getting metrics that are imposed on us. And I think sometimes I can really tell that too. So they're also feeling our anxiety on top of their own. And I think these other communities can offer alternative spaces for learning that aren't as baggage. There isn't that baggage of anxiety. We had a member of our lab, Ahmed, who's from Saudi Arabia, and he said like the way that he learned how to speak English, like actually verbally speak English, was he playing World of Warcraft, and his guild members, like, he wanted to start leading some of the raids that they were doing, and the guild members were like, you got to use your mic, man. You got to do it. That's how we got to do this. And that's like, he got to practice speaking English outside in a very real environment, outside of the classroom, with a lot of these kind of unique opportunities, right, to be able to express himself. So I think that there are these opportunities out that there's like a structure, but there's not a structure, and there's a little bit more wiggle room than we often see in our classrooms.
Well, I will be happy to say nice job, Dr. Jones-Manson, and also to the other presenters. I thought this was a great session. I think we're just about a couple minutes out, though, in terms of the next session starting. So.
Yeah, we'll have another session starting here in about 3 minutes. I didn't want to cut anyone off because the conversation was so intriguing.
With a bunch of psychologists, sometimes you got to just jump right in there, tell them stop talking.
You know what?
This could go
We've
on
got
forever.
some wiggle room. There's a reason for the wiggle room. So, yeah, thank you everyone for such great discussions. And thank you to our presenters. Certainly feel free to stay for this last session, and then we'll have a closing in the main room in an hour. So thank you again.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.
Amazing, amazing.
Thanks. Take care.